They say the lantern guides the lost, but here...
The generator's hum became my heartbeat. I stood on the marble terrace of the Whitmore estate, watching smoke columns rise from the mainland like funeral pyres, and I didn't move to help. That's the part that eats at me. Not the survival, not the isolation. The choice to stay comfortable while the world drowned in teeth and chaos. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was the caretaker of a private island that belonged to people who never made it home. The last text from Harrison Whitmore came through at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Don't wait up. Taking Sarah and the kids to her mother's place upstate. Lock everything down. We'll call when we can. The message arrived while I was replacing floodlights along the dock, my hands covered in rust and grease. I wiped my phone screen clean and typed back a thumbs-up emoji. Professional. Simple. The kind of response a good caretaker gives to employers who pay obscenely well for privacy and competence. That thumbs up was the last communication I had with another human being for 63 days. The island sat 5 miles off the coast, accessible only by the 2 boats Harrison kept in the boathouse, a sleek speedboat for quick trips and a larger yacht for entertaining guests who never came as often as the Whitmores hoped. The estate itself sprawled across 5 acres of carefully manicured land, the main mansion with its 8 bedrooms, the guest house where I lived, gardens that Sarah had designed with obsessive precision, a greenhouse, tennis courts that no one used, and a perimeter of old-growth trees that made the whole place feel like a secret floating in the ocean. I learned about the outbreak the way most people did, through fragmented news reports that escalated from civil disturbance to avoid hospitals to nothing at all. My satellite internet held for 3 days, long enough to see footage of Atlanta burning, long enough to watch a news anchor in Chicago get pulled off camera by something that used to be human, long enough to watch a live stream from some kid in Portland who kept screaming that his neighbors were eating each other while police sirens wailed in the background until the feed went dark, long enough to see the president's address get interrupted by what looked like a technical difficulty, but was probably something much worse happening behind the cameras. Long enough to understand that the Whitmores weren't coming back. The first week I kept working. Routine felt like sanity. I trimmed hedges that didn't need trimming. I cleaned windows that were already spotless. I inventoried the supplies in the mansion's oversized pantry and found enough canned goods, dried pasta, and rice to last months. The industrial freezers in the basement held enough frozen meat to open a restaurant. Cases of bottled water lined one wall. The Whitmores had prepared for long stays that never happened, and their paranoia about being cut off from the mainland became my salvation. Every morning, I'd wake up in my guest house bed, shower in water heated by solar panels Harrison had installed as a pet project, and walk the property with a checklist I'd memorized years ago. Check the generator fuel levels. Inspect the dock for storm damage. Test the water filtration system. Monitor the security cameras. Not that anyone could reach the island without a boat, but old habits die harder than empires. The cameras faced outward, toward the water and the distant shoreline. That first week I watched boats flee the mainland. Some headed for open ocean. Others circled aimlessly before running out of fuel and drifting. One ski boat made it within a mile of the island before I saw figures on the deck start fighting. The boat capsized. I watched through binoculars as people thrashed in the water, and I couldn't tell who was drowning and who was being pulled under by something else. I put the binoculars down and didn't pick them up again for 2 days. The satellite phone in Harrison's office still had power. I tried calling out exactly once, got automated messages saying all circuits were busy, That mechanical voice asking me to try my call again later felt like a joke the universe was playing. There was no later. There was only now. And now was burning on the mainland while I stood in an office that smelled like leather and expensive wood polish. I tried texting Kelly, my sister. The message showed as sent, but never delivered. I sent 3 more over the next hour, each one more desperate than the last. Kelly, if you get this, head for the coast. I can come get you. Kelly, please respond. Kel, I'm scared. Tell me you're okay. The phone just sat there in my palm, screen glowing with unanswered messages, and I realized I was waiting for a reply from someone who was probably already dead. If you've ever convinced yourself that doing nothing was the same as survival, you'll understand why I never took the speedboat out to look for survivors. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what comes next is where I stopped being the hero of this story. By week 2, the guilt started talking. It had a voice that sounded like my sister Kelly, who had lived, in a suburb 40 miles inland from the coast. She used to joke that I had the cushiest job in America. "You're a glorified house sitter for rich people who are never home," she'd say during our monthly phone calls. "You've got it made, Marcus." Meanwhile, I'm breaking up fights between 11-year-olds who think TikTok is a legitimate career path. Kelly taught middle school. She lived in a townhouse with thin walls and neighbors who played music too loud. When the outbreak hit, she would have been surrounded by people, trapped in density. No 5-mile buffer of ocean. No mansion with generators and water filtration and enough food to outlast a siege. I told myself she got out, made it to higher ground, found a group. I told myself that lie every single day, because the alternative meant I was living in a dead woman's brother's skin, eating another family's food, sleeping in sheets worth more than my truck, while Kelly's body rotted in a classroom, or a parking lot, or a hallway where she'd tried to run. The ocean didn't care about my guilt. It kept rolling against the island's rocky shore, consistent and indifferent. I started fishing off the dock with poles I found in the boathouse. Harrison had expensive gear he'd never used, still wrapped in plastic with tags attached. The rods were graphite composite, light as air, with reels that cost more than my first car. I taught myself to cast using YouTube videos I downloaded before the internet died. The first fish I caught was a decent-sized bass. I gutted it on the dock, my hands shaking from lack of practice, and grilled it on the mansion's outdoor kitchen. It tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months, and I hated myself for enjoying it. Eating fresh fish while the world ended felt obscene. So did sleeping in air-conditioned silence. So did showering with hot water every morning. So did having electricity when I knew that people on the mainland were hiding in darkness, terrified that light would draw the infected like moths to flame. But I kept doing it, because comfort is a drug, and withdrawal hurts more than guilt. The gardens became my project. Sarah Whitmore had designed them with the help of a landscape architect, whose portfolio included botanical gardens and resort properties. There were raised beds for vegetables, trellises for climbing beans, berry bushes that produced fruit I'd only ever seen in grocery stores. Blueberries, the size of my thumbnail. Raspberries so red they looked artificial. She'd planned to spend summers here, teaching her kids about where food came from, making it a learning experience wrapped in privilege. I expanded the vegetable beds, tore up decorative flower sections, and planted potatoes, carrots, onions. I raided the greenhouse for seeds and soil. The physical work kept my hands busy and my brain quiet. Digging in dirt didn't leave room for imagining Kelly's final moments. or wondering if Harrison and Sarah made it to her mother's house before the highways became graveyards. The greenhouse was a cathedral of glass and steel, climate-controlled and automated. Sarah had grown orchids in there, exotic varieties that required precise conditions. I ripped them all out. Felt like vandalism at first, destroying something beautiful that she'd cultivated with care. But beauty didn't fill stomachs, and I needed the space for tomatoes, peppers, herbs, practical things, survival things. By week 4, I'd established a routine so rigid it bordered on ritualistic. Wake at dawn, check the perimeter, tend the gardens, fish for 2 hours, prepare 1 real meal a day, maintain the mansion, sleep, repeat. The mansion maintenance was the strangest part. No one was coming back. I knew that. But I couldn't stop cleaning. I dusted furniture in rooms I never entered. I vacuumed carpets that had no footprints. I polished silverware that would never see another dinner party. It felt insane, but it also felt necessary. Like if I let the house fall into disorder, I'd be admitting something final about the world and my place in it. The master bedroom was the worst. Sarah had left clothes in the closet. Summer dresses hung next to winter coats. Harrison's watch collection sat in a glass case on the dresser. Rolexes and Omegas that cost more than I made in a year. Their kids' rooms were frozen in time. Toys on shelves, books on nightstands, beds made with hospital corners. I cleaned those rooms once a week, and every time I felt like an archaeologist documenting an extinct civilization. Emma's room had posters of scientists on the walls. She'd wanted to be a marine biologist. Joshua's room was filled with Lego sets in various states of completion. A space station, a castle, a pirate ship. He'd been 8 years old. Emma was 10. I knew this from family photos scattered throughout the house. Birthday parties, beach vacations, Harrison teaching Joshua to cast a fishing line off this very dock. I started talking to myself around week 5. Nothing dramatic, just narrating tasks. Checking the fuel gauge now, still 3/4 full. Should switch to the backup tank next week. It helped. The silence on the island wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, heavy. The kind of quiet that made you forget what your own voice sounded like. Birds helped. The island hosted dozens of species that nested in the trees and dove for fish in the shallows. I'd never paid attention to birds before. Now I learned to identify them by sight and call. Gulls, terns, ospreys, herons. They didn't care about the outbreak. They hunted and ate and nested and fought and lived like nothing had changed. I envied them. At night, I'd sit on the terrace with a glass of filtered water. Never alcohol, never touched the Whitmore's wine cellar. Couldn't bring myself to add that to the list of things I was taking. And watch the mainland. Some nights I saw fires. Some nights I saw nothing. Once, I saw what looked like searchlights sweeping back and forth, like someone was signaling, and I went inside and closed all the curtains so I wouldn't be tempted to signal back. The boats sat in the boathouse, fueled and ready. I checked them weekly, kept the batteries charged, made sure the engines turned over. I told myself I was maintaining assets, being responsible. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was keeping my escape route open while refusing to use it for anything resembling heroism. Week 6 brought the first real storm. Hurricane season remnants that churned the ocean into froth and hammered the island with rain that sounded like gravel on the mansion's roof. I'd weathered storms here before, back when this was just a job, but doing it alone felt different. The generator strained against the wind. Lightning turned the ocean silver for split seconds before plunging everything back into darkness. I spent the night in the mansion's basement, surrounded by freezers full of food, listening to the structure groan and wondering if the island itself might wash away. It didn't. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving debris scattered across the property. Tree branches on the tennis courts, seaweed draped over the dock. One of the garden trellises had collapsed. The greenhouse had lost 3 panels of glass. I spent 3 days cleaning up, grateful for the work, grateful for the distraction. That's when I found the first body. It washed up on the North Beach, tangled in kelp and driftwood. Male, maybe 40, bloated from days in the water. He wore the remains of a business suit, dress shirt and slacks, no jacket. I couldn't tell if he'd drowned or been infected, or both. His face was too damaged to show details. I buried him above the tide line using a shovel from the garden shed. And I didn't say any words over the grave, because I didn't know any that weren't religious. And even if I did, what would I say? Sorry you died while I was eating grilled fish and sleeping in Egyptian cotton sheets? 2 more bodies arrived over the next week. Different states of decomposition, different ages. One still wore a life jacket that hadn't saved him. I buried them next to the first. Started marking graves with stacked stones because it felt wrong not to. These people had names once. Families, lives that mattered. Now, they were anonymous corpses delivered by the tide to an island where one man played house in someone else's paradise. I stopped fishing off the North Beach after that. Week 8 was when the dream started. Nothing supernatural, just memory fragments twisted into nightmare shapes. Kelly knocking on the mansion's door, her face gray, asking why I didn't come help. Harrison standing in the foyer, watching me cook his food, wearing an expression I couldn't read. Sarah in the garden, asking what I'd done to her flower beds. Emma and Joshua playing on the beach, turning to look at me with eyes that were wrong somehow, empty and accusing. I'd wake up gasping, and the silence would remind me that I was alone, completely alone. 5 miles from a dead civilization, living in luxury and utterly perfectly isolated. The psychological weight of it hit differently than I'd expected. This wasn't the isolation of a mountain cabin or a desert bunker. This was isolation wrapped in marble and mahogany, suffering from an absence of suffering. Being a survivor without having survived anything more challenging than my own conscience. I started writing things down. Not a journal. That felt too precious. Just observations on loose paper I found in Harrison's study. Day 54, tomatoes are producing well. Saw a pod of dolphins from the east dock. Another body on the North Beach. Bare facts. No emotion. Writing it made it real in a way that living it didn't. The question I couldn't escape, the one that circled my brain during every quiet moment, was simple. What kind of person was I? Before the outbreak, I'd thought of myself as decent. Not a hero, but not a coward. I worked hard, paid my bills, called my sister once a month, helped neighbors when asked, normal. Average, fine. Now I didn't recognize myself. I'd become a creature of comfort and cowardice, hoarding resources and safety while people died in numbers I couldn't comprehend. The boats sat ready, fuel in the tanks. I could have made supply runs to the mainland, could have looked for survivors, could have done something other than trim hedges and tend vegetables and maintain a mansion for ghosts. But I didn't. Because every time I considered it, I imagined bringing infection back to the island, imagined losing my sanctuary, imagined dying badly after months of living well. The risk felt too high, the comfort felt too necessary. So I stayed. Week 10 brought a new sound. Helicopters. Military, maybe, flying in formation along the coast. I watched from the terrace as they passed, heading north, and I didn't signal them. Didn't light flares or wave or try to attract attention. I just watched them disappear and told myself it was better this way. What would I even say? Thanks for checking, but I'm fine here in my stolen mansion. The vegetable gardens were thriving. I'd figured out irrigation using the mansion's sprinkler system. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, all producing more than I could eat. I started preserving food using canning equipment from the kitchen, following instructions from a survival book I'd found in Harrison's library. The book was called Self-Sufficient Living and had probably been a coffee table decoration. Now, it was my Bible. It felt absurd, canning vegetables in a gourmet kitchen while wearing clothes I'd stolen from Harrison's closet because my own were wearing out. Everything I wore belonged to a dead man. Everything I ate came from supplies his family had purchased. Every comfort I enjoyed existed because people with more money than I'd ever see had built a fortress of privilege that I now inhabited like a hermit crab in a stolen shell. Fishing remained my primary protein source. I'd gotten good at it, knew which spots produced which species, knew how to clean and prepare everything I caught: bass, snapper, grouper, mackerel. I caught them all. The freezers stayed full of the Whitmore's food, untouched except for items that wouldn't last. Vegetables going bad, dairy past its prime. I couldn't bring myself to eat the steaks and frozen seafood. It felt too much like theft, even though theft implied someone to steal from. The nights were the hardest. Darkness on the island was absolute. No light pollution, no distant glow from cities, just stars and ocean and the small bubble of generator-powered light I allowed myself in the guest house. I'd sit on my porch and listen to the waves and wonder if I was the only person left on this section of coast. If the helicopters had found anything. If anyone anywhere was rebuilding, or if humanity was just bleeding out slowly in the dark. Week 12, I saw smoke signals from the mainland. 3 columns, evenly spaced. Someone alive and organized enough to signal. I watched through binoculars as the smoke rose and dissipated. It continued for 3 days, then stopped. I never took the boat over, never investigated, never helped. I've thought about that decision every day since. Maybe they survived without me. Maybe they died waiting for help that never came. Maybe I could have made a difference. Or maybe I would have gotten everyone killed, myself included. I'll never know, and that uncertainty is its own kind of torture. By month 4, I'd stopped maintaining the mansion. Just couldn't do it anymore. The absurdity broke me. I kept the generator running, kept the water system functional, kept the security cameras operational, practical things. But dusting furniture and vacuuming carpets and polishing silver, done. Over. The mansion could decay into ruin for all I cared. I moved entirely into my routine of survival. Gardens, fishing, preserving food, maintaining equipment, nothing extra, nothing performative, just existence stripped to its functional core. The loneliness changed shape. Early on, it felt sharp, a presence I could identify and wrestle with. Now, it felt like absence, a hole where connection used to be. I forgot what conversation sounded like, forgot the rhythm of responding to another person's thoughts. I talked to myself constantly, but that's not conversation. That's just noise to fill silence. I started leaving the security monitors on at night, watching the empty feeds like television. Cameras pointed at the dock, The shore. The driveway that led nowhere. Nothing ever moved except wind in the trees and animals hunting. But I watched anyway, desperate for the illusion of something happening beyond my immediate sphere. Week 16, another storm. Smaller than the first, but still significant. I weathered it in the basement again, and this time I didn't mind. The storm felt honest, raw, real. It didn't pretend to be anything other than destructive force. I respected that more than I respected myself. After the storm, I found a lifeboat on the South Beach, Coast Guard issue, partially deflated, empty except for emergency rations and a first aid kit. Someone had abandoned it or died trying to use it. I dragged it above the tide line and scavenged what I could. Medical supplies I didn't have, emergency flares, a hand crank radio that didn't pick up any broadcasts. I tried the radio for hours, cranking the handle until my arm ached, scrolling through frequencies. Static, empty channels. Once I thought I heard a voice, just a fragment, too distorted to understand. But I could never find the frequency again. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe hope was playing tricks on me. The isolation was doing something to my head. I knew that. Could feel it happening. Thoughts would spiral in loops. I'd lose track of time, find myself standing in the garden with no memory of walking there. I'd start tasks and forget to finish them. My handwriting in the daily notes became erratic, harder to read. Part of me wondered if I was losing my mind. Another part wondered if going crazy was just adaptation. Maybe sanity required other people, and in their absence the brain just rewired itself, became something else. Something functional in isolation but incompatible with civilization. Not that civilization existed anymore. At least not in any form I recognized. Month 5, the sunsets became my anchor. Every evening I'd sit on the terrace and watch the sun die over the ocean, and for those few minutes, everything felt manageable. The colors, oranges bleeding into purples, reds fading to grays, reminded me that beauty still existed, that the world contained more than death and guilt and isolation. I stopped counting days. The number didn't matter. Day 147 inches and day 162 inches were just arbitrary labels on identical experiences. The seasons would change eventually. Winter would come. The gardens would die back. I'd rely more on fishing and preserved food. Then spring would return. And I'd plant again, and the cycle would continue until something broke it. Infection reaching the island, equipment failure, illness, injury, or just the slow erosion of will that comes from existing without purpose. The question of purpose haunted me. Before the outbreak, purpose was simple. Maintain the estate, collect a paycheck, live quietly. Now, I maintained the estate out of habit. There was no paycheck. Quiet had become deafening. What was I doing this for? Survival? Sure. But survival toward what end? If I was the last person alive on this section of coast, and for all I knew I was, then what did it matter if I survived another day or another year? Who would it benefit? Who would even know? These thoughts came mostly at night, in the hours between lying down and actually sleeping. Dark thoughts for dark hours. I'd fight them off with practical concerns. The generator needed maintenance. The fish traps needed checking. The tomato plants needed pruning. Small tasks. Manageable problems. Things I could control when everything else had spiraled beyond control. Week 20 brought the first cold snap. Not winter yet, but a preview. The temperature dropped into the 50s at night. I started sleeping in the mansion instead of the guest house. better insulation, better heating. I chose a guest room on the second floor with windows facing the ocean. Neutral territory, not the master bedroom or the kids' rooms. Somewhere that felt less like trespassing. The mansion at night was cavernous and strange. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. The wind made the structure creak and settle in ways I'd never noticed when people lived here. Empty houses have different acoustics than occupied ones. They sound hollow, haunted, not by ghosts, but by absence. I kept one lamp on in the room where I slept. Couldn't handle complete darkness anymore. Needed the small circle of light to remind me where I was, who I was, that I still existed in a physical space with boundaries and rules. The preserved food from my summer harvest filled an entire pantry. Jars of tomatoes, pickled vegetables, fruit preserves from Sarah's berry bushes. I'd done good work. Survival work. The kind of thing that would matter if anyone else existed to share it with or benefit from it. Alone, it just felt like hoarding. Month 6. Half a year in paradise. Half a year in purgatory. The distinction had blurred so completely I couldn't tell which was more accurate. I'd stopped wondering if the Whitmores were alive. They weren't. I knew that with the certainty of someone who'd watched enough bodies wash ashore to understand that survival was exception, not rule. Harrison and Sarah and their 2 kids, Emma and Joshua, I'd learned from family photos in the hallway, were dead. The mansion was mine by default, by abandonment, by the simple fact that I was here and they weren't. That knowledge should have brought relief or freedom. It brought nothing, just a flat acknowledgement of fact. The boats still worked. I tested them every week. The speedboat purred to life every time I turned the key. The yacht's engines rumbled with reliable power. I could leave any time, could take supplies and fuel and head for another coast, another place. Look for other survivors. Try to find something beyond this island. But I didn't, because leaving meant abandoning certainty for chaos, meant giving up safety for risk, meant potentially dying badly when I could die comfortably. Years from now, in Egyptian cotton sheets with a full stomach. Cowardice. That's what it was. I'd stopped dressing it up as caution or strategy. I was a coward living in a dead family's house, eating their food, wearing their clothes, and maintaining their property like I had some right to it. The moral weight of that reality pressed down on me constantly. I'd wake up thinking about it, go to sleep thinking about it. Every fish I caught, every vegetable I harvested, every night I slept in comfort. It all came with the right. Nothing gave me the right. I just took it, took the safety, took the resources, took the luxury, and built a life on top of a foundation that belonged to corpses. Week 24 brought another helicopter, just one this time, flying low along the coastline. Military markings. I watched it pass and felt nothing. No hope. No fear. Just observation. It disappeared to the south and didn't return. I wondered sometimes what the world looked like now, how many people survived, whether governments still functioned, whether anyone was fighting back or if humanity had just scattered into isolated pockets, each group hoarding what they could, defending what they had, and forgetting what civilization used to mean. The fishing kept me fed. The gardens kept me supplied. The generator kept running. The water system kept filtering. The island kept existing, a 5-acre bubble of pre-outbreak normalcy floating in an ocean of chaos. And I kept living, not thriving, not happy, just living, one day at a time, one meal at a time, one sunrise to one sunset to one sunrise again. if you're still with me, wondering how this could possibly get worse or better, stay here for what happened next, because I wasn't alone forever. And when isolation finally broke, it broke in the worst possible way. Drop a comment about what you'd have done differently, because I guarantee you'd have made the same choices I did. The security camera on the South Dock caught movement at 3:47 a.m. on day 183. I was awake. Insomnia had become my default state, watching the monitors out of habit when I saw it. A small boat drifting toward shore. Not powered, just floating on the current. I grabbed binoculars and went to the terrace. Moonlight painted the ocean silver. The boat was maybe 30 feet long, a cabin cruiser with damage visible even from a distance. It hit the shallows and grounded itself on the beach. Nothing moved for 5 minutes. Then the cabin door opened. A man emerged first. Tall, thin, moving carefully like someone who'd been injured. He climbed down to the beach and turned back to help someone else out. A woman. Then 2 small shapes. Children. My heart started hammering. First people in 6 months. First living people. They were real. They were here. And I didn't know what to do. I watched them from the terrace for 20 minutes before moving. The man was checking the boat, looking at damage I couldn't see from my position. The woman sat on the beach with the 2 children huddled against her. Even from a distance, I could tell they were exhausted. The way they moved, the way they just sat there without exploring or talking. Complete depletion. My first instinct was to hide, let them rest on the beach, maybe scavenge what they needed from their boat, then leave on their own. I could stay in the mansion, keep the lights off, wait them out. They'd never know I was here. My second instinct was shame so sharp it felt like a physical wound. 6 months. I'd spent 6 months living in luxury while people suffered. And now, when suffering had literally washed up on my beach, my first thought was to hide from it. I went back inside and stood in the mansion's foyer, hands shaking, trying to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. The old me would have helped immediately, would have run down to the beach with blankets and food, and offered shelter without thinking twice. But the old me had died sometime around week 3, replaced by this hollow thing that valued comfort over conscience. The new me understood risk, understood that 4 people meant 4 chances for infection, 4 mouths to feed, 4 bodies taking up space in my carefully maintained sanctuary, 4 people who might see what I had and decide they wanted it more than I did. I looked at Harrison's watch collection in the display case, at Sarah's carefully organized closet, at Emma and Joshua's frozen-in-time bedrooms. This family had built something beautiful, and then lost it to chaos. Now another family was sitting on the beach, and I had the power to help or hide. I grabbed blankets from the linen closet and a first aid kit from the bathroom, filled a thermos with filtered water, put some preserved food in a bag. Nothing fancy, just canned soup and crackers. Basic humanity, the bare minimum. Then I walked down to the beach, and with each step, I felt 6 months of isolation cracking around me like ice. They saw me coming from 100 yards away. The man stood up immediately, positioning himself between me and his family, defensive, ready to fight despite looking like he could barely stand. "It's okay," I called out, raising my hands to show the blankets and supplies. "I live here. I'm not going to hurt you." The man didn't relax. Up close, I could see he was younger than I'd thought, maybe 30. His face was gaunt, covered in patchy beard growth. His clothes were salt-stained and torn. He had a cut on his forehead that had scabbed over badly. "There's no one else?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much recently. Just me. I'm the caretaker. Was the caretaker. It's complicated. I set the supplies down on the sand between us. You're welcome to these. There's water, food, blankets, medical supplies if you need them. The woman made a sound, half sob, half laugh. She had her arms around two kids, a boy and a girl, both under 10. They looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. How long have you been out there? I asked. 3 weeks, the man said. Boat ran out of fuel 2 days ago. We've been drifting since then. 3 weeks on a boat. I tried to imagine it. The fear, the hunger, the uncertainty of every sunrise. Are any of you hurt? Infected? The man shook his head. We're clean, been tested. Had to prove it to get on the boat in the first place. He paused. There was a quarantine camp. Government run. It fell apart. We took what we could and ran. The woman stood up slowly, still holding the kids. I'm Rachel. This is my husband, David. Our son, Michael. And our daughter, Sophie. She looked at the supplies I'd brought, then back at me. Is that really your water? Clean water? Filtered and safe, I said. Drink as much as you need. I watched Rachel open the thermos with shaking hands and give it first to the kids, then to David, before taking a sip herself. The way they drank, desperate but controlled, like they were afraid it might disappear, told me everything about the past 3 weeks. There's more, I said. The mansion has food, beds, hot water. You can stay as long as you need to. David looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Suspicion mixed with hope, mixed with exhaustion. Why? Because you need help, I said simply. And because I have more than I need. It was the first true thing I'd said in months. Getting them to the mansion took longer than it should have. The kids could barely walk. Michael was maybe 8. Sophie looked 6 or 7. David had to carry Sophie while Rachel supported Michael. I carried their supplies, a couple of backpacks that felt too light for 3 weeks of survival. The sun was starting to rise by the time we reached the mansion. I led them in through the side entrance, directly to the guest wing. 3 bedrooms with attached bathrooms. Clean. Maintained. Ready for guests who would never come. Bathrooms have hot water, I told Rachel. Towels in the cabinets. I'll bring food in an hour. Get cleaned up. Rest. And we'll talk later. Rachel looked at me like I'd offered her the moon. Hot water, solar panels, and a generator. It's all still working. She curled up immediately, not even bothering to take off her shoes. Thank you, he said quietly. It's been hard to find decent people. I nodded and left before they could see my face, because I wasn't sure I qualified as a decent person anymore. Decent people didn't spend 6 months in paradise while the world burned. They didn't hide from helicopters and ignore smoke signals and bury bodies without bothering to look for survivors. Back in the kitchen, I prepared food, real food, not just canned soup. I made eggs from the chickens I'd been keeping in a converted garden shed, another project from month 3. Toast from bread I'd learned to bake, fruit from the greenhouse, coffee from the Whitmores' extensive pantry. It felt strange cooking for other people. The kitchen had echoed with emptiness for so long that having a purpose felt foreign. I brought the food on a rolling cart, one of those fancy serving things Harrison and Sarah had used for outdoor entertaining, knocked on the guest room doors. Rachel answered, hair wet from the shower, wearing clothes I'd left outside their doors. Some of Sarah's things that seemed close to the right size, I don't know how to thank you, she said. Eat first. We'll figure the rest out later. I left them alone and went back to the terrace, watched the sun climb over the ocean, watched their grounded boat rock in the shallows, tried to figure out what happened next. For 6 months, I'd existed in a bubble, self-sufficient, isolated, safe. Now that bubble had burst, and I didn't know the rules anymore. They slept for 16 hours. I checked on them periodically, old caretaker habits kicking in. Made sure they were breathing, made sure the kids were okay. Tried not to think about how easily I'd almost let them die on the beach while I hid in my mansion. When David finally emerged, it was late afternoon. He found me in the garden harvesting tomatoes. "Your kids okay?" I asked. Sleeping still. Rachel too. He looked around at the gardens, the greenhouse, the tennis courts in the distance. "This place is incredible. They didn't make it back." "And you just stayed?" I pulled another tomato from the vine, ripe and heavy. I was already here when it started. Seemed safer to stay than to leave. David was quiet for a moment. "We saw things out there, on the mainland, in the camps, people turning on each other, fighting over scraps. The infected were bad, but the survivors were worse sometimes." "I believe it. You really been alone this whole time?" 6 months. You're the first people I've seen alive since it started." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know if that makes you lucky or cursed." "Both," I said. "Probably both." We worked in silence for a while, David helping me harvest vegetables even though he didn't need to. Eventually he spoke again. "The camp we were in was outside Charleston. Military set it up in the early days. Thousands of people. They were trying to control it, but there were too many infected. Too many people panicking. It fell apart in less than a month." "How'd you get out?" "Boat belonged to a guy named Carl. He had it docked nearby. When things went bad, he offered to take families with kids. Said he knew a place up the coast where we'd be safe." David's jaw tightened. "Carl got bit on day 3, turned on day 4. We had to throw him overboard. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what words existed that could address that kind of trauma. There were 8 of us on that boat originally," David continued. "By the time the fuel ran out, it was just us. Disease, accidents. One guy just gave up, walked into the ocean one night. We couldn't stop him. I'm sorry. Are you?" He looked at me directly. "You've been here in paradise while people died, while kids starved, while families got torn apart. Are you actually sorry, or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" The question hit like a fist. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think about it every day. The people I could have helped, the supplies I could have shared. I had boats. I had resources. And I just stayed here. Why? Because I was scared. Because I didn't want to die. Because comfort is easier than courage." I met his eyes. "I'm not proud of it." David studied me for a long moment. "At least you're honest about it. That's more than most people would be. If you've ever had to face what you've become and not liked what you saw, you'll understand why that conversation felt like being flayed alive." Hit that subscribe button and share this, because the hardest part of survival isn't staying alive. It's living with the choices you made to get there. Rachel and the kids joined us for dinner. I'd set up the dining room. Seemed wrong to eat in the kitchen with guests, even if the formality felt absurd given the circumstances. I cooked pasta with tomato sauce made from the garden harvest, bread, salad, simple food that tasted like civilization. Michael and Sophie ate like they were afraid the food might disappear. Rachel kept having to remind them to slow down. I watched them and thought about Kelly, wondered if she'd been this hungry before the end, wondered if she'd had anyone to feed her, or if she'd died alone and scared. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten," Michael said, around a mouthful of pasta. "Michael, manners," Rachel chided gently, but she was smiling. Sophie didn't talk much, just ate and watched me with large, serious eyes. She reminded me of Emma, Harrison's daughter, that same intelligent, measuring look. After dinner, we sat on the terrace. The kids explored the yard under Rachel's watchful eye, while David and I talked logistics. "Your boat's pretty damaged," I said. "I checked it this morning. Hulls cracked. Engines probably shot from running without oil. So we're stuck here. There are 2 other boats, a speedboat and a yacht, both functional. You could take one when you're ready to leave." David looked at me sharply. "You just give us a boat. You need it more than I do." And honestly, having both was always excessive. Harrison liked having options. Harrison was the owner? Yeah, him and his wife Sarah. 2 kids. They were trying to get upstate when it started. I don't know what happened to them, but they're not coming back. Rachel joined us, having settled the kids on the lawn with some toys I'd found in Joshua's room. "What happens now?" she asked. "Long term?" "That's up to you," I said. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want. There's food, water, shelter. It's safe here. Or I can help you get somewhere else, if you have a destination in mind." "We don't," David admitted. "The plan was just to find somewhere safe, somewhere away from the infected and the chaos. We thought maybe an island, somewhere remote." "Well, you found one." Rachel sat down, pulling a blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. "What about you? You planning to stay here forever?" "I haven't thought past today in months," I said honestly. "I've just been surviving, maintaining, existing. That's not living," she said quietly. "No." We fell into silence, watching the kids play. Michael was showing Sophie something he'd found in the grass. A beetle or a stone. I couldn't tell. Their laughter carried across the lawn, the first sound of childhood joy this island had heard in months. "I need to know something," David said. "Are we prisoners here, or are we guests?" The question surprised me. Guests, obviously. Why would you think otherwise? The weapons, probably. The knowledge of how everything works, and we're weak and vulnerable and desperate. That's a dangerous combination. I understood what he was really asking. Whether I was the kind of man who'd take advantage. Whether help had strings attached. "You're guests," I said firmly. "Free to leave whenever you want. Free to take what you need. I'm not holding anyone hostage, and I'm not expecting anything in return for basic humanity." Rachel's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. We've encountered people who weren't so kind." "I'm not kind," I said. "I'm just trying to be less of a coward than I've been for the past 6 months." That night, lying in my room, I listened to the sounds of other people in the house. Footsteps, running water, muffled conversation. Sounds I'd almost forgotten existed. It felt wrong. The mansion had been my tomb for so long that having life in it again felt like a violation. But it also felt right, like waking up from a coma. like remembering I was human. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about David's question. What kind of person was I? The answer kept shifting. The man who'd hidden for 6 months. The man who'd offered help when it literally washed up on his beach. Somewhere between those two versions was the truth, and I didn't like either option. The next few days fell into a strange new rhythm. I showed David and Rachel how everything worked. The generator, the water filtration, the gardens. David was handy, jumped right in helping with maintenance. Rachel took over some of the cooking, seemed to need the purpose. The kids explored the island like it was a theme park, found the tennis courts and tried to play with rackets too big for them. Discovered the greenhouse and marveled at tomatoes growing in December. Spent hours on the beach collecting shells and building elaborate sand structures. Watching them reminded me what I'd been missing. Purpose, connection, reason to care about anything beyond the next meal and the next sunrise. Rachel caught me watching them one afternoon. "They've been through too much," she said. "Michael had nightmares every night on the boat. Sophie stopped talking for almost a week. This place, it's helping them remember what normal feels like." There's nothing normal about any of this. No, but there's safety, and that's something we haven't had in months. I wanted to tell her that safety was an illusion, that infection could reach the island, that supplies would eventually run out, that I was just a caretaker playing God in a dead family's house. But I didn't, because maybe she knew all that already and had chosen to embrace the illusion anyway. Week 2, with guests, brought the first real test. Sophie developed a fever. Rachel found me in the garden, her face pale with fear. She's burning up, and she's complaining about her stomach. My first thought was infection. My second thought was shame for having that thought. Let me see her. Sophie was in bed, face flushed, clearly miserable, but she was conscious, responsive. No signs of the infection I'd seen in the news footage months ago. This was regular sick, normal childhood illness. I checked the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom, found children's fever reducer, pain medication. Brought them to Rachel with bottled water. "It's probably just a bug," I said. "Her body's been under stress. She's exhausted. Sometimes the system crashes once it feels safe enough to let down its guard." Rachel gave Sophie the medicine with shaking hands. "I can't lose her. I can't lose either of them. You won't. She's going to be fine." I stayed while Rachel sat with Sophie. Brought cool water for compresses. Made soup for when the fever broke. Felt useful in a way I hadn't in months. Sophie's fever broke after 36 hours. She was weak, but recovering. Crisis averted. But the scare left its mark on all of us. Reminded us how fragile everything was, how quickly safety could evaporate. David and I were working on the dock when he brought it up. "We need to talk about the future," he said. "Winter's coming. We need to make plans. Food storage, heating, medical supplies. And we need to talk about what happens if someone comes here, infected or otherwise." He was right. I'd been avoiding those conversations, content to exist in the present without planning for complications. "There are weapons in the house," I admitted. Harrison had a gun safe in the basement, hunting rifles, a shotgun, a pistol, ammunition. I've been avoiding them. Why? Because having guns means accepting I might need to use them. And I didn't want to accept that. David nodded slowly. "I get it. But we need to be realistic. This place is valuable. Someone will eventually find it, and we need to be ready to defend it, or negotiate, or do whatever we have to do to protect our families." Our families, I repeated. The phrase felt strange. I'd spent so long alone that thinking in terms of plural felt foreign. You're part of this now, David said. Whether you like it or not, you helped us. That makes us your responsibility and makes you part of our group. I didn't know how to respond to that. Being part of something again. Being responsible for people. It terrified me more than the isolation ever had. We spent the next week preparing, inventoried all supplies, organized the gun safe, created emergency plans. David suggested we map out the island completely, identify defensive positions, plan escape routes. It felt paranoid and necessary in equal measure. Rachel started teaching the kids using books from the mansion's library. Math, reading, science. Maintaining normalcy through education. Michael complained about having school during the apocalypse, but I could tell he was relieved by the routine. Sophie still didn't talk much, but she'd started drawing. Filled pages with pictures of the island, the mansion, her family. Bright colors that contrasted sharply with the darkness of everything we'd been through. Month 2 with guests. I realized I hadn't thought about Kelly in days. The guilt hit like a truck. I'd been so focused on the present that I'd stopped dwelling in the past, stopped imagining my sister's final moments, stopped wondering what I could have done differently. That night, I told Rachel about her, about the monthly phone calls, about her job teaching middle school, about how I'd sent texts that never got delivered. "You think she's gone?" Rachel asked gently. "I know she is. I've known since day one." But accepting it felt like giving up. It's not giving up. It's acknowledging reality. And reality is that most people didn't make it. The ones who did are the exceptions, not the rule. Does that make us lucky? I think it makes us obligated. We survived. That means something. We owe it to everyone who didn't, to actually live, not just exist. Her words stuck with me. Living versus existing. I'd been existing for 6 months before they arrived, going through motions, maintaining systems, breathing without purpose. Now I had something resembling purpose again, and it scared me how much I needed it. Winter came slowly to the island. Temperature dropped into the 40s at night. I showed David how to manage the heating system. We harvested the last of the garden vegetables and relied more on preserved food and fishing. The kids adapted to the cold better than the adults. Michael and Sophie played outside in jackets, built forts in the trees, explored tide pools. They were healing. Slowly, but healing. Rachel and I talked a lot. She told me about their life before. David had been an engineer. She'd been a nurse. They'd lived in suburbia with a mortgage and car payments, and all the normal stresses of pre-outbreak life. The kids had gone to school and taken karate and complained about bedtime. "I miss the boring parts," she said one evening. "The traffic jams, the grocery shopping, the parent-teacher conferences, all the stuff we used to complain about. I'd give anything to have that back." "You think it'll ever come back? Civilization? I don't know. Maybe somewhere, but not like it was. Too much has been lost." All 5 of us around the table. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we ate in comfortable silence. It felt like family. Not my family, not their family, but family nonetheless. David and I worked on repairing their boat during warm afternoons. It was beyond saving, really, but working on it gave us something to do, gave us a project. "You think we'll leave?" he asked one day. "Do you want to?" "Part of me does, Part of me wants to find other survivors, see what's left of the world, try to rebuild something. And the other part, forget the world exists beyond that water. Let someone else worry about rebuilding. I understood completely. The tension between responsibility and self-preservation, between courage and comfort. I'd been living that tension for months. 3 months in, we saw another boat. This one was moving under power, heading north along the coast. We watched from the terrace, all 5 of us, as it passed about a mile offshore. Should we signal them? Michael asked. David and I looked at each other, the same calculation happening in both our heads. More people meant more resources shared, more risk, more complications. But it also meant connection, information, possibility. No, David said finally. Not yet. We don't know who they are or what they want. Michael looked disappointed but didn't argue. That decision, not to signal, felt significant. Chosen to protect what we had, rather than risk it for unknown possibilities. I couldn't tell if it was smart or cowardly. Maybe both. Share this story if you've ever had to choose between helping strangers and protecting your own. Drop a comment about what you would have done, because these decisions don't have right answers, just consequences you have to live with. The security cameras caught another movement 3 weeks later. This time it was a person, not a boat. A swimmer, someone who'd made it to the island on their own. We found him collapsed on the North Beach. Young guy, maybe 25. Hypothermic, exhausted, barely conscious. David and I carried him back to the mansion while Rachel ran ahead to prepare a room. We stripped his wet clothes, wrapped him in blankets, forced warm liquid down his throat. His name was Tyler. He'd swum from a boat that capsized a mile offshore. Said he'd been the only one who made it. How many were with you? David asked. 4, my brother and 2 friends. Tyler's voice cracked. I couldn't save them. We let him rest, gave him time to recover. But the atmosphere in the mansion had changed. Tyler's arrival felt different from David and Rachel's family. Less like rescue and more like intrusion. David pulled me aside that night. We need to be careful. Why? He could be dangerous. He almost died. He's not a threat. Not now. But desperation makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. And he's alone. No family to keep him grounded. No one to answer to. I wanted to argue. Wanted to believe that everyone deserved help. But I'd spent 6 months learning that safety mattered more than idealism. We watched Tyler carefully. Over the next few days, he was grateful, polite, helped with work around the property. But there was something off. A desperation in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. It came to a head 2 weeks later. I found Tyler in the basement, going through supplies, not taking anything, just cataloging, counting. What are you doing? I asked. He jumped, clearly startled. Just looking, wanted to see what we had. We? Yeah, I'm part of the group now, right? The presumption bothered me. You're a guest. That doesn't mean you get to inventory our supplies. His expression hardened. Our supplies. You mean the supplies you stole from a dead family? The words hit like a slap. Excuse me? You're just the caretaker. You're squatting in someone else's house, eating someone else's food, acting like you have some right to it all. We all see it. I felt my hands ball into fists. Get out of the basement. Or what? You'll kick me out? Send me back into the ocean? He stepped closer. You need me as much as I need you. We all need each other. So maybe stop acting like you're in charge and start treating this like what it is, a group of survivors trying to make it work. And I hated him for saying it out loud. I walked away before I did something I'd regret. Found David in the workshop. "We have a problem," I said. That night, the five of us, me, David, Rachel, Tyler, and Michael as a junior member since he was old enough to have an opinion, sat down for a meeting. Sophie stayed in her room with drawings and books. "We need rules," David said. "Clear expectations. Everyone pulls their weight. Everyone contributes. Everyone respects boundaries." Tyler leaned back in his chair. "And who decides these rules? Marcus? He's been here longest, but that doesn't make him king." "No one's saying anyone is king," Rachel interjected. "But we do need structure, organization. Otherwise, we'll fall apart. Work assignments, food distribution, decision-making processes." It was exhausting and necessary. By the end, we had something resembling a system. Tyler agreed to all of it, but I could tell he wasn't happy. He wanted more say, more control, more ownership of a place that didn't belong to any of us. Over the next month, tension simmered. Tyler did his work but complained constantly, questioned decisions, made suggestions that felt more like demands. He was smart and capable, which made him more dangerous. He could do math, could see that resources would eventually run thin, could calculate that 4 people was more sustainable than 5. I started locking my bedroom door at night. David noticed. "You don't trust him, do you?" "No, but I don't know what to do about it. We can't just kick him out. That's a death sentence." It was a cold calculation, one I hated myself for making. But isolation had taught me that safety sometimes required hard choices. The breaking point came during a supply run. David and Tyler took the speedboat to check out a marina we'd spotted on the mainland. They came back with canned goods, batteries, medical supplies, but they also came back barely speaking to each other. "What happened?" I asked David privately. He wanted to go inland, look for more stuff. I said no, too dangerous. He called me a coward, said we were wasting opportunities. David's jaw was tight. Then he suggested maybe the group would be better off with different leadership. There it was, the challenge. Tyler wasn't content to be a guest or even an equal member. He wanted control. That night, I called another meeting. Just the adults. Michael was old enough to understand politics, but this conversation needed to happen without kids. "Tyler, are you happy here?" I asked directly. He looked surprised by the question. "What kind of question is that?" "A straightforward one. Are you happy with how things are working? Be more organized, more aggressive about gathering resources. And you think you should be leading those efforts. I think we should all have equal say, not just defer to you and David because you were here first." Rachel spoke up. "This isn't about who was here first. It's about trust. And right now, Marcus and David are the ones who've proven they can make good decisions. You've been here 6 weeks. You haven't earned that trust yet." Tyler's expression went cold. "So I'm a second-class citizen? Is that it?" "No," David said, "but you're on probation. And if you can't accept that, maybe you'd be happier somewhere else." Tyler looked at each of us in turn. "You're really going to kick me out?" "We're giving you a choice," I said. "Accept the structure we've built, contribute without undermining, and you're welcome to stay. Or take supplies, take the speedboat, and find somewhere else that suits you better." He stood up abruptly. "Fine, I'll go. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt guilt. He left 3 days later with enough supplies to survive for weeks, the speedboat, and a map marking other islands and safe harbors. We watched him motor away from the dock, and I wondered if we'd just murdered him or freed ourselves from a threat. Did we do the right thing? Michael asked. He'd watched the departure from the terrace. I don't know, I admitted, but it felt necessary. Life on the island settled into something almost normal. David and I maintained the property. Rachel homeschooled the kids and managed food preparation. Michael helped with fishing. Sophie drew and slowly started talking more. We celebrated Christmas with decorations from the mansion's storage. I found presents for the kids, books, toys, games that had belonged to Emma and Joshua. It felt strange, giving away a dead family's belongings, but it also felt right. Like the Whitmores would have wanted their children's things to bring joy instead of gathering dust. Rachel cried when she saw the kids opening presents. I didn't think we'd have this again. Normal things. Holiday things. It's not really normal. I said, no, but it's close enough. That night, after the kids were asleep, the three of us sat on the terrace with hot chocolate made from mix I'd found in the pantry. I've been thinking, David said, about the future. Long term. And we can't stay here forever. Supplies will run out eventually. Equipment will fail. And we don't know what's happening in the rest of the world. There might be communities forming, actual civilization rebuilding. Or there might be nothing but chaos, Rachel countered. Maybe. But don't we owe it to the kids to find out? To at least try to connect with other survivors? I'd been avoiding this conversation for months. The island was comfortable, safe. Leaving meant risk. But David was right. We couldn't hide forever. What are you proposing? I asked. A scouting trip, you and me. Take the yacht, spend a week exploring the coast, see what's out there. Rachel stays here with the kids where it's safe. Rachel didn't look happy about it, but she nodded. If you're going to do this, do it soon, before winter really sets in. We left on a Monday morning. The yacht handled well, engines running smooth. We followed the coast north, staying close to shore, watching for signs of life. We found ruins, towns burned to shells, cities empty except for the infected that still wandered the streets. A few survivors who shot at us when we got too close. One community that seemed functional, maybe 50 people living behind barricades, but they made it clear outsiders weren't welcome. On day 5, we found something different. A cargo ship anchored in a deep harbor, people moving on deck, organization. The ship flew a flag, stars and stripes. Military, David asked, or people pretending to be military. We approached carefully. They hailed us over working radio, coordinated communication, real organization. A voice came through. Identify yourself and state your purpose. We're survivors from an island south of here, David responded. Just looking for information, trying to figure out what's left of the world. Maintain your distance. We'll send a boat over. They did. 3 men in Coast Guard uniforms that looked legitimate. They boarded our yacht with weapons ready but not aimed. Where you coming from? The leader asked. His name tag read Martinez. Private island, 5 miles offshore. We've been there since the outbreak started. Martinez whistled low. Lucky. Most islands got overrun with refugees. You been alone this whole time? I was. Then others showed up. We're a group of 5 now. 2 adults, 2 kids, and me. Kids survived? Martinez looked genuinely surprised. That's rare. Most families didn't make it intact. What's happening out here? I asked. Is there a government, military operations, any kind of coordination? Fragments. The Navy's still operational in some theaters. Armies scattered. Government's gone. DC fell in the first month, but there are pockets. Safe zones, quarantine communities. It's not organized, but it's not total chaos either. And you? David asked. Coast Guard remnant. We're documenting the coast, marking safe harbors, trying to establish communication networks. It's slow work, but it's work. We talked for an hour. They gave us a radio frequency for emergencies, warned us about pirate groups that had formed, survivors who'd turned to raiding, told us about an island chain to the north where communities were forming. You should consider relocating, Martinez said. Safety in numbers. The islands up north have farming, fishing fleets, even some manufacturing. It's the closest thing to civilization that's left. We'll think about it, I said. After they left, David and I sat in silence for a long time. What do you think? He finally asked. I think the island suddenly feels very small. We returned home and told Rachel everything. She listened carefully, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you want to stay or go? I don't know, I admitted. The island is safe, but Martinez is right. We can't build anything real with just 5 people. If there are communities forming, actual society being rebuilt, don't we have an obligation to be part of that? Obligation to who? Rachel asked. We have obligations to ourselves, to the kids. To survival isn't the same as living, I said, echoing her words from months ago. We debated for days, weighed options, considered risks. Finally, we put it to a vote. All 5 of us. Michael voted to explore the northern islands. I want to meet other kids. Sophie just shrugged, which we took as ambivalence. Rachel voted to stay. I'm tired of running. Tired of risking everything. I want stability. I think we need to try. If it doesn't work out, we can always come back. That left me the deciding vote. I thought about Kelly, about Harrison and Sarah and Emma and Joshua, about 6 months of isolation and luxury and guilt, about Tyler and the choices we'd made, about what it meant to survive versus what it meant to live. We go, I said finally. We explore. We see what's out there, but we don't burn our bridges. The island stays here. If things don't work out, we come back. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this smart. We scout first. Make sure it's safe before we move the kids. It took 3 weeks to prepare. We packed the yacht with supplies, secured the mansion, created caches of food and equipment in hidden locations around the island, just in case. The day we left, I stood on the dock and looked back at the Whitmore estate. The mansion gleamed in morning sun. The gardens I'd tended. The life I'd built from someone else's foundation. You okay? David asked. I spent 6 months here hiding from the world. Now I'm leaving it behind to face what I was hiding from. I'm not sure if that's growth or just delayed cowardice. Maybe it's both. Maybe that's what survival looks like. Doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, until you figure out how to do the right thing. We loaded everyone onto the yacht. Sophie clutched her drawings. Michael carried books. Rachel had packed photos and keepsakes. David handled navigation. I took one last look at the island as we motored away. My sanctuary. My prison. My home that was never really mine. The future was uncertain. The Northern Islands might be everything Martinez promised or nothing but false hope. We might find community or chaos, safety or danger. But we were going to find out. Together, the generator would keep running on the island. The cameras would keep recording. The mansion would keep standing, waiting for the Whitmores who would never return, or waiting for us to come back if the world proved too harsh. 6 months ago, I'd watched smoke rise from the mainland and done nothing. Today, I was heading toward whatever was left, choosing uncertainty over comfort, choosing to be part of something instead of hiding from everything. If that makes me a coward or a hero, I honestly don't know. But it makes me human again. And after 6 months of isolation, that's worth the risk. If this story made you think about what you'd do when faced with impossible choices, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because survival isn't about having all the answers. It's about making the best choice you can with what you know and living with the consequences. Hit that subscribe button, because the real story is never about staying safe. It's about figuring out what's worth surviving for.